Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. The world has obviously changed since Mr. Donald Trump has taken office. And it makes me think about where we are in terms of net zero. Often we always have a conversation about what we're doing here in the UK, and we might obviously look at what, America's doing. But there's a whole part of the world we don't look at enough. And that's what I want to address in this podcast. Asia is the place with the most populous nations on the world. It's a place where people are developing and changing. It's got a great history and it's also got a great future. But that future, recent reports have shown, there's been some stagnation in the way net zero has been taken up. A lot of that is to do with the fact that they're still trying to bring people out of poverty in places like India and Southeast Asia and China, and they need to use the resources they have. One of the countries that's kind of sort of bucking that trend, has always been very successful, is Singapore, a place I visited many years ago, 20 years ago. And I thought it'd be really interesting to see what's going on there, because it's kind of a leader in what's going on, and it's also a really strong business hub. So I'm delighted to say today I'm joined, despite the time difference, by Madeline Loh from Enterprise Singapore. Hello, Madeline, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Nice to see you, Sumit.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 20 years, it's been too long. I should have come back by now.
Yes, you should be. We have completely changed our landscape since then. Yeah.
It was a beautiful place, I remember, very interesting. For people who don't know about Singapore, just give us a little kind of idea of what it is, because it's very famous for business, but people might not know why it's famous. Can you give us a sort of potted history of how come Singapore has become so successful in Asia?
Well, I think we have a long history of being a regional hub for Southeast Asia and also for Asia. Over the years, we've transformed our industry from manufacturing to include services, and we've also built a very conducive business environment which attracts people to Singapore. So that includes having a healthy ecosystem of players, not just the industries, but also the financial institutions, the IP protection laws and regulatory frameworks, which provide businesses with certainty. So I think that has really helped us to build up the ecosystem in Singapore, and hopefully it will continue to be the same for the coming years.
It was a trading port, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a trading port. Yeah. But I think over time we realized that it can't all be trade, and trade itself has evolved to be more digital in nature. So we expanded into manufacturing way in the earlier days when we obtained independence. We attracted some of the big boys, including some of the names like Tata, ExxonMobil came to Singapore. And we focus very much on selected industries that we want to work on in the earlier days as well. And we've upgraded ourselves from the lower value manufacturing, and we moved on to the more higher value added services like pharmaceuticals and biomedical industries in Singapore. Yeah.
It's one of those countries that people don't realize. It's very small. It's kind of, I think, the size of the Isle of Wight. It's one island, isn't it?
Really small. Yeah, I think our land size would be smaller than any city in India, for example. Probably about.
Yeah. And yet you're the 30th biggest economy in the world. Incredible. You have more capita than the US. It's very successful, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we always want to learn from our neighbors as well as the bigger economies as well. We really owe our partnership actually to international partnerships, because we are very small. We actually very small island. We don't have natural resources, and we really depend on partnerships with the world to achieve our economic success. Yeah.
It's very beautiful. I've been there, as I said. It's also I remember very clean. I was warned that you can't drop chewing gum years ago.
Well, then chewing gum.
And you have to cross at the traffic lights. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. You can't jaywalk in Singapore.
But let's get on to kind of what you're doing. Enterprise Singapore, it's part of the government. What's its role, this body that you work for?
We're part of the government. We are an economic agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And essentially, our mandate is to help and champion enterprise development. And this means that we work with Singapore companies who are committed to the cause, to build capabilities, to innovate, and lastly, to go global, which is very important in the Singapore context. And we also work with foreign partners. These can be companies, governments, institutes of higher learning, to look for meaningful and win-win partnerships with our companies. So that's pretty much our mandate. Yeah.
Where does all of this sit with net zero? I mean, let's be honest, much of the world, particularly in Asia, has been living on fossil fuels to get itself up to speed. That's probably the case for you guys as well, with a lot of LNG. Just before we explore what your goals are around net zero and what you're trying to do to help businesses, Singapore itself has no nuclear, is that right? So do you have any power at all naturally, or do you have to import everything?
We import most of it. Some naturally will be for solar deployment. Yeah.
Right.
But as you know, we are quite limited by land constraints. So that is the amount that we can get from solar is quite limited. Yeah.
Do you have wind? Do you have like offshore wind or anything like that?
No.
So it's all LNG that I assume is coming on tankers from around the world.
Most of it. That's right. Yeah.
So that is cleaner than other places. We don't use coal for sure, but it's certainly dirtier than it could be. So what is the government committed to doing around net zero and trying to reduce the amount of LNG you're using?
Well, we have committed to net zero emissions by 2050. We have done a study, and that we are basically tackling the areas which are the biggest, heaviest emitters, which are essentially our power and our industries. And we have set out a plan and a roadmap to see how we can tackle these issues. And this can be in the area of, number one, improving the energy efficiency of industries. I was just talking to one of the companies earlier today, and as an industry, you can try to improve your energy efficiency, but then after that, new technologies will come out. So actually, it's a continuous cycle where companies need to look at continually improving and innovating to achieve maximum energy efficiency. So that's one. The second thing the government has done is actually committed to import clean energy into Singapore. So that's something a little bit different from the rest of the world.
Right.
We don't have our natural resources. So we're committed to import about up to 6 gigawatts of clean energy from our neighbors by 2035. And that we are already working with our neighbors like Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam to bring some of that in.
So I assume you're using interconnectors to get the power to
yes. So for some cases, cables will need to be, and transmission lines will need to be developed. So it's a longer term goal, but this will form up to about 1/3 of Singapore's energy needs. Yeah. So
and that power is coming from where? From offshore wind in those countries, or solar?
It depends which country. So, for example, in Vietnam it will be wind, but Indonesia it might be more of solar. So it is a bilateral discussion, but also supported by the commercial feasibility. So there are companies who are forming consortiums to bid for these projects. Yeah,
it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because a lot of nations would go, right, we've got the land, and we will build wind turbines, solar farms, nuclear power. That's very difficult for Singapore, isn't it?
It's very difficult. We just don't have the land to do so. So we have to come up with a little bit more innovative ways. But I thought just to also highlight, we don't really stand for big amounts of global carbon emissions. I think by our count, we are about 0.1%. So part of our efforts for net zero is also to work with the rest of Asia. We look at different things, and under Enterprise Singapore, we have a project facilitation office called Infrastructure Asia that helps to help Asia to support social and economic growth through sustainable infrastructure development. So in that effort, we try to bring together bankable or marginal bankable projects to bankable projects in Asia. Yeah.
I mean, there's a recent report looking at kind of, the reporting of where nations are against their national determined contributions. And I think India is at kind of, and China, India's reduced its carbon intensity by 36%, way short of 45%. China is at 50 compared to its 65. The issue with Asia is there's a lot of manufacturing, as you said. There's a lot of people who are still in poverty that need to be brought up. You have a contradictory position because you're actually a very wealthy country, but you don't have any of those sort of energy resources. So is Singapore trying to work with its partners to try and sort of reduce that balance? Because, it's no good you having more power, but the power's coming from a dirty source. And then you've got to try and help these other nations try and reduce the amount of emissions they're producing. So how does Singapore see its role in that region that you're at?
Well, not necessarily under Enterprise Singapore, but I can just share some of the efforts that we're doing as the whole of government. I think one of the key issues for clean energy projects, in particular for Asia and Southeast Asia, is in the area of financing, making bankable projects. And Singapore is a financing hub, so we try to do our part. We have launched initiatives in this aspect. I think our central bank, which is our Monetary Authority of Singapore, has launched a Financing Asia's transition program. It's called FAST-P. So essentially, we put up to $500 million for concessional capital. And we will match dollar for dollar with some of our partners who have signed on to this program as well. So that will try to catalyze some of the capital that is coming out for this region for decarbonization efforts. So that's one of the things. The other thing that's important for Asia, we felt, was the regulatory frameworks. So not just financing, but whether the region's governments are able to put out incentives, frameworks, policies that will attract investors, right? So we do have programs where we look towards strengthening the capacity and enhancing the expertise in regional governments. For example, we run this growing infrastructure course in different themes. So it can be in energy, it could be in data centers, etc., where we bring in regional government officials to exchange ideas and knowledge about how we could improve the regulatory framework in Southeast Asia, and South Asia too.
What's the view? It's very interesting. Obviously, I have my own family in India, but across Asia, I think sitting in Europe, people sort of see this as a very kind of, it's net zero here or whatever, and we're trying to do it, and a lot of complaints about, we're only, 1% and you're 0.1%. But that part is the most populous part of the world, as I said at the beginning. It's kind of the heart of manufacturing for the world right now. There's a lot of food grown in that part of the world. All of this comes with footprints. I don't expect you to speak for the whole of the region, but do you see that are they just trying to get their lives up? Or do you think ordinary people are concerned about the environment, are concerned about climate change, things like that? What's the feeling?
I think generally the countries are concerned. I mean, there is a concerted effort globally to move towards net zero. I mean, everybody has their own targets. But you can see in our conversations with the different governments and even with our partners, we see industries becoming, when we interact with companies, we see that there's a growing awareness that they need to do things like sustainability reporting. There's an increased awareness of, for example, how their wastewater is being treated How is it coming out? So I think we are slowly getting there. Maybe not at the peak, but the awareness is definitely there.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt, do you think that's there, government is one thing, do you think it's there across citizens? I mean,
citizens.
or are citizens kind of thinking, oh, I might recycle more, or I'm worried about the smog or the traffic, things like that?
Oh, I can't speak for the rest of Southeast Asia, but for Singapore, it is something that we are tackling. I mean, when I grew up, I don't think we even talked about recycling.
No, me neither.
But today in Singapore, I think the awareness has grown, and we have put up programs to encourage companies and citizens to introduce recycling. We have bins out there, e-waste, and then we try to put up programs to educate children as well as adults on how to recycle, because even in the sorting of waste, it's not as clear cut as just dumping your waste into the bin, right? So there are things like that, but whether it goes to the rest of Southeast Asia, slowly but surely, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
to some extent.
No one wants to live in the pollution. So what are you doing for businesses? So give us a view of where businesses are. As we said earlier, it used to be much more kind of industrial. It was a port. You had a lot of manufacturing. I think cotton goods and things like that. So what would you say the businesses are now? Are you mainly a nation of tech businesses, or do you still have big factories producing goods with emissions? Paint a picture for our audience.
Well, Singapore's GDP is still 20% from manufacturing, thereabouts. So we do have industries. Be totally transparent, we have Jurong Island, which is the petrochemical hub, where all the big oil majors are there doing their refining, etc. And manufacturing, chemicals manufacturing. We have also other industries like food and logistics companies in Singapore as well, huge tanks in Singapore as well. So we can't deny that actually industry is a big part of Singapore's economy.
No.
So, and we don't want to chase them away as well, right?
No.
So what we really want to do is help these companies in their decarbonization journey. And beyond that, in energy efficiency and all that, we also see a movement to try and test new things. So we see a trend of these companies and also popping out of startups in some novel ways, but not quite commercialized yet. So things like hydrogen. Are there better electrolyzers? Are there better fuel cells, more efficient fuel cells that could have been developed? We see interest in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So not only just the big majors, but also startups that are starting to pop up in this area in Singapore. Also partly driven by the government, I guess. We have also put out a tender for a request for proposal for pilot shipment of hydrogen into Singapore. So that has catalyzed a little bit of conversations. So things like that, we are hearing snippets of it, but it's not full blown yet.
No, I understand. But the thing is, obviously, when I went, as I said, a bit tongue in cheek, it was very clean, but I think there's a very famous building which is like kind of an apartment with trees or something. I've seen pictures of it. A lot more. I mean, it's a very green country as well. There's a lot of so what are you doing about trying to protect your natural environment? What are you doing about, for example, have you got an increase in electric vehicles or hydrogen buses? What's the picture in terms of what you guys are trying to do to clean up the environment of your citizens?
Okay. Well, I guess what you're talking in Singapore loves to plan. So we have our Singapore National Green Plan that we put out and that sets out some goals for us by 2030. And precisely, right, Sumit, one of the points is really about being a city in nature. So we do have a key master plan where we have, I would say, intentionally planned green areas to increase our carbon sink in Singapore. We are also moving towards mandatory electric vehicles, or not electric vehicles, but cleaner vehicles by a certain date in Singapore. We are trying to move towards cleaner energy. We've actually increased our installed solar capacity by 10 times in the past 7 years. So there are some of these things. Then, of course, educational programs to educate the the general public about recycling, changing mindsets, etc. So downstairs from my house also, you will see even a bin for e-waste and fabrics. Yeah.
Better than us.
Yeah. So it really, when it's there, then you see that people start to use it. We are increasing the number of charging points for electric vehicles so that people will increase the adoption of it. So the infrastructure is there for people to use it if they want.
Are EVs quite popular, or is it still mainly a diesel and petrol cars?
Mostly still diesel and petrol cars, but definitely I see an uptake of EVs in Singapore. You can see in many of the office buildings today even there will be charging points for EVs. So that encourages the adoption of electric vehicles over time. Yeah.
You have another issue, which is obviously you're an island, so you have a lot of coastal areas,
yes,
which can be used, but also you have issues of flooding. I remember reading about it before I went.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. So what are you doing about that? And the other thing that is often talked about particularly in big cities is the urban heat sink. The fact that the city, because from what I remember, it's pretty much one big city and surrounded by greenery. So let's talk about those two things. What are you trying to do to sort of protect your coastal areas, and what are you doing about the urban heat sink? Let's start with the coast to start with.
You're absolutely right, Sumit. Bang on the buck. Our Public Utilities Board, which is essentially our Singapore Water Board, has announced investment $100 billion over the next 100 years to protect our coast, because I think there are certain numbers that are a little bit scary, that our shoreline will actually erode, and then there will be issues with flood management throughout. So progressively they will be putting out contracts to help to secure our coast. They're doing feasibility studies at the moment. But more importantly, it's also about the still in early stages, but also about whether there are new technologies to look at, number one, coastal monitoring, whether we can predict what is supposed to be our response when some of all these things happen. And secondly, in technology in protecting the coast. So this part, Enterprise Singapore is working very closely with PUB on.
And in terms of the urban heat sink, it's a big thing we have here in London. I live on the edge of London now, and I can feel the difference. It's much colder here than it is in the centre. Singapore, obviously, you're in the tropics, but that's compounded by all the sort of emissions and the fumes of vehicles. So what are you doing about that? Because that can be a big problem.
Yeah. For Singapore, I envy you that you're in a cold country now. We are quite warm.
No, I want to be where you are.
It's quite warm here, and also we are affected by monsoon. So actually, you just miss a week of heavy rains in Singapore when it comes to, and so it's kind of a balance, but we're always in the tropics and it's always warm and humid here. Well, there are a few things that we do. Some are mature, some are not so mature. Firstly, I think is in the design. We are built and we have master planned for climate resilience and urban heat resilience. Secondly, we have put out technologies like district cooling. So in Singapore, there are technologies like district cooling in at least 2 areas in Singapore.
That's so funny. We hear about district heating, and now it's brilliant. District cooling, you never even think about it.
We'll never think about district heating.
You don't need it.
But you never know. But so we actually put out district cooling. If you're in Singapore, do visit the Marina Bay Sands. You won't even know that a district cooling plant is right next to the hotel.
What is it? It just provides air conditioning for housing?
Yes, so it is essentially a carved out district where it integrates the cooling systems across many buildings in that district. And that provides for higher energy efficiency usage for us. But that also then helps in our urban heat resilience, right? So that we don't need to use so much energy to cool these areas in Singapore. Another area for us will actually be in advanced materials, the building materials that we use. There are new technologies that are coming out. We're testing out something called low carbon concrete in Singapore. Yeah. So where you actually use carbon dioxide that is waste to inject it into concrete to make it stronger, then it also becomes a carbon capture sort of thing. So there are some of these things that we are trying to do, but we started first with planning, then we execute some of the technologies to ensure that they're a little bit cooler. Yeah.
Where do you see? Obviously, we can't not talk about where Trump is, and I don't expect you to comment on his policies. That's up to him. But obviously, the world has been struggling. I think the last few years with intention compared to action. And one of the big things in the COP that was recent is that there wasn't enough funding for developing nations. Not you're a fairly developed nation, but there are areas in your region that don't have it. That are going to be suffering from climate change. Is there a feeling in Asia, and you're sort of a leader down there, that not enough is being done from the developed nations who've had 200 years of coal and stuff like that to develop, to help these nations, try and decarbonize quicker?
Well, from Singapore's perspective, or at least from my Enterprise Singapore perspective, I think it's about partnerships and whether we can strike that win-win balance for everyone in the projects. So it can't be a one-way street. So it will be what...
You can't be told, cut your emissions and that's it. Yeah, I get it.
Yes, yeah. So it has to be meaningful partnerships that are formed. And whether each of us have something to give as well as something to take from the partnerships. So we've tried to do that with even the developed nations, the way that we work with them. And we recognize that many of these countries are at the forefront, not just of financing, but also of technology. So we do have many innovation projects with them in this space, which Enterprise Singapore runs with some of these nations. And hopefully some of these will lead to technologies that will be scalable and commercializable in the near future. So in these cases, it always has to be win-win and meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I don't know if you have children or you've got friends who've got the younger generation, but I'd be interested to see what they're like. No, you're young yourself. Don't worry. Are the younger people, because here obviously a lot of young people are now making decisions about buying more sustainable clothes or goods, and there's a lot of that. Particularly recently, there was a lot of pressure coming from the youth. Is there anything similar from younger people in Singapore asking, government, hey, we want to see more of this, we want cleaner stuff?
This is just my personal view, and I don't interact with the young people except in my office. But the general feeling is there is an awareness of sustainability. There are people who want to do more in sustainability. So just anecdotally, there are many people who want to join the divisions looking at sustainability in Enterprise Singapore, for example. People want to be part of the...
They're looking for jobs in
yes, they want to look for jobs in this area and build their expertise in this area. So that's quite interesting to see. People are moving very simple things, for example, like the youth will insist of, let's not use plastic bags when we go to the supermarket.
Yeah.
Let's use a reusable bag, right? So we do see this kind of behavior coming on, partially driven by the government also, because we started to charge for plastic bags. But
we did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is an awareness, and it's quite heartening to see the interest to participate in the sustainability sector. Yeah.
Before we end, as I said right at the beginning, we have a certain view where we sit in Europe, and everyone looks at that. What would you say to people who are sitting here thinking, well, this is net zero is all of the stuff, doesn't matter what we do because people in Asia, there's a narrative that China keeps polluting, India keeps polluting, now America keeps polluting. Doesn't matter what we're doing here. Clearly, Singapore is a leading nation in Asia. What would you say to people just personally who think that well, it doesn't matter what we do because people in Asia they'll just keep polluting?
I would say personally, every little bit counts. Even as a small nation, Singapore was 0.1%, but we are trying our best to abate and to tackle the issue for the long run, for future generations. And while I think that countries have to balance between economic considerations, political considerations. I really truly believe that countries, at least regionally, are starting to think about or including such considerations into their policies, into their frameworks, and into how they attract investors into their countries. So to me, every little bit counts, yeah. And hopefully we do it in a sustainable and commercially feasible way, and that's where Enterprise Singapore comes in. We hope to look for more partners.
I agree with you. I think people have to be incentivized to make businesses successful. Listen, Madeleine, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for staying after work to do this.
Thank you, and thanks for having such a lovely chat with me.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think you've really helped, not just me, but hopefully our audience get an idea of what it's like around the world. And this is sort of stuff I want to do more, because we are one planet and we should learn what other people are doing. Brilliant work you're doing at Enterprise Singapore. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. Now, tell us what you think. Get in touch on social media. Let us know your views on what you think Singapore's doing and what you think we should be doing more to sort of bring this message across to the rest of the world. Keep subscribing. Thanks to Rob for the production on this episode. Catch you next time.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.